My farm had always been my sanctuary, a place where the scent of freshly tilled soil mixed with the gentle clucking of hens, where the wind carried the soft rustle of cornfields and the distant neighing of my old mare, Ruby. It wasn't just land. It was my grandfather's legacy, passed down through generations, a 6-acre paradise nestled just beyond the city limits of Pine Creek. I was not just a farmer. I was a judge, a highly respected name in the courtroom, feared by criminals and admired for my unwavering commitment to justice. My gavel had sent corrupt officials to prison, had dismantled crime syndicates, and had upheld the very laws that this country stood upon. But even with all my knowledge of the law, I wasn't prepared for the war that was about to unfold. Not in the courtroom, but right here on my own soil. Trouble arrived the day Patricia Whitmore moved into Oak Ridge Estates, a recently developed high-end neighborhood that had sprouted just beyond my eastern fence. The Homeowners Association had always been a mild nuisance, sending occasional letters about community beautification and aesthetic standards. But I ignored them because they had no jurisdiction over my land. That changed the day Patricia became HOA president. She arrived at my property line in a spotless white suit, clutching a clipboard as if it were a shield against the dirt beneath her feet. "Judge Crawford," she said with an exaggerated smile, her red-painted lips curling unnaturally. "It's time we discuss some improvements." I leaned against my fence, wiping sweat from my brow after an afternoon of repairing my old barn's roof. "My farm doesn't fall under HOA regulations," I said, meeting her gaze, waiting for the usual legal dance that people attempted when they didn't know who they were dealing with. She clicked her tongue and produced a folder from her bag. "We've recently submitted a petition to rezone the surrounding area, your property included. Oak Ridge Estates has grown, and we believe it's time for this entire area to uphold a more polished image." She gestured toward my free-roaming chickens, my wooden fences, my fruit trees that stretched proudly toward the sun. "Unfortunately, your farm does not meet those standards." I laughed, an actual belly laugh, because the absurdity of what she was suggesting was almost comical. "Let me stop you right there, Patricia. My farm has been here for decades. You can't rezone land that was never part of your jurisdiction to begin with." Her smile faltered. "With the right connections, anything is possible." That was the moment I knew this wasn't a simple disagreement. This was the opening salvo in a calculated war, one where she saw herself as the general and my farm as the battlefield. The next week, the letters started arriving. Official HOA notices, complete with fines and compliance violations. Too many livestock animals. Unauthorized fencing structure. Unapproved agricultural activities. They were nonsense, legally void, but their purpose wasn't to enforce rules. Their purpose was to harass me into submission. I ignored them at first, tossing each letter into a growing folder of evidence. Then the complaints started. Calls to the city about unpleasant odors from my compost pile. Reports of early morning noise violations because my rooster, Thunder, crowed at dawn. Fabricated accusations that my goats were escaping onto the main road. Each time I disproved the claims, forcing the city to back off. But the real blow came when neighbors, people who used to buy fresh eggs from me, began turning away. Patricia's influence spread like a virus, infecting people with whispers of decreasing property values and the problematic farm, ruining the neighborhood's image. My once friendly road became hostile territory, with Oak Ridge residents sneering as they drove past my gates. Only one neighbor, Daniel Carter, a soft-spoken single father who lived on the edge of the development, still greeted me. "They're trying to push you out," he warned one evening, leaning on my fence as the sun set behind us. "Patricia's been holding private HOA meetings, only inviting the most influential homeowners. She's planning something big." I sighed, my fingers gripping the worn wooden rail. "They can plan all they want. The law's on my side." Daniel hesitated. "She's got a friend on the city zoning board." That was the first real pang of unease I felt. Patricia wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. She was a strategist, someone who knew how to bend the system. "I have to leave town next week for a judicial conference," I told him. "I'll be gone for 2 weeks." He nodded. I'll keep an eye on things. That night, as I packed my bags, I installed extra security cameras around my property, positioning them to capture any potential trespassers. Before leaving the next morning, I double-checked my property survey markers, making sure they were still where they had always been, clearly defining the legal boundaries of my land. As I pulled out of my driveway, I noticed Patricia standing in her front yard, watching me go. Her expression was unreadable. But behind her, in her open garage, I saw something strange. 3 large red containers, neatly lined up against the wall. Gasoline containers. I shook the thought away. Surely even she wouldn't go that far. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I knew something was wrong the moment I turned onto the long dirt road leading to my farm. The sky looked dirty, streaked with an unnatural smog, and the air carried the thick, acrid scent of something burned beyond recognition. My chest tightened as I pressed the gas pedal harder, my tires kicking up dust as my truck roared forward. The moment my farm came into view, my breath left my body like I had been punched in the gut. Every single thing I had built with my own hands was gone. The barn, where I kept my tools, my supplies, and where my grandfather once stored bales of hay. A charred skeleton, blackened beams sticking up like the broken ribs of a dead giant. The chicken coop, which I had painstakingly built with my own 2 hands, ensuring my hens had a safe, warm place to lay their eggs, reduced to ashes. My vegetable gardens, the same soil I had nurtured for years, growing the juiciest tomatoes, the crispest lettuce, the sweetest strawberries, burned beyond recognition. Nothing but smoldering earth and the occasional twisted remnant of a metal garden tool. But the worst part? The silence. The familiar, comforting clucking of my hens. Gone. The soft snorts of my goats. Gone. Even the buzzing of bees that used to dance around my wildflower patch. Absent. The only sound was the wind, whistling mournfully through the devastation, carrying the scent of destruction. I stumbled out of my truck, my legs barely holding me up. No. My mind rejected what my eyes saw. I sprinted to where my chicken coop had stood, my boots crunching against the scorched ground. Ruby, Henrietta, Cluck, Thunder. I shouted the names of my animals, but the only answer was the distant sound of a car approaching. Then I heard laughter. A slow, deliberate clap echoed behind me. I turned, my jaw tightening as I saw Patricia Whitmore, standing at the edge of my property, her white pantsuit spotless, her arms crossed, lips curled into a smirk. Beside her stood Gerald Carter, the HOA's treasurer, and 2 other HOA board members, like vultures circling a carcass. Well, Patricia mused, taking a step forward. I see you finally got the message. I felt my hands curl into fists, my entire body shaking with rage. What did you do? My voice came out low and dangerous, a tone that had made hardened criminals tremble in my courtroom. Patricia sighed, as if she were speaking to a misbehaving child. We sent you multiple notices about the violations on your property. Unkempt structures, excessive livestock, that awful smell. Since you refused to comply, we took action. Action? I gestured to the ruins around me, my voice rising with fury. You burned down my farm, my home, my animals. Gerald shifted uncomfortably. But Patricia? She didn't even flinch. We didn't burn anything, dear. We simply hired a contractor to handle the violations. It's unfortunate that conditions were so dry. She glanced at the blackened earth, and for the first time, I saw it, her mask slipping. She was lying. They hadn't just handled violations. They had destroyed everything. I stepped forward, getting dangerously close, my voice now cold and level. You're lying. Patricia's smirk wavered. Watch yourself, Judge Crawford. You may be used to controlling things in your courtroom, but this is Oak Ridge Estates. You're not the judge here. A slow smile crept onto my face, despite the rage bubbling in my chest. That's where you're wrong. I took a deliberate step past her and walked toward the charred remains of my fence. My boots kicked at something metallic, and when I looked down, my stomach clenched. It was a red gas can half buried in the ash. The very same kind I had seen lined up in Patricia's garage before I left. I bent down, running my fingers over the surface. It reeked of gasoline. My head snapped up, my mind racing. If the fire had truly been accidental, why was there evidence of an accelerant? I turned to Patricia. She saw me holding the gas can, and for the first time I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not confidence. Not arrogance. Fear. Gerald cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. Look, Crawford. We know this is a lot to take in, but it's done. The property has been rezoned, officially part of Oak Ridge Estates now. Your farm was a problem. It's better this way. I laughed. A short, humorless laugh. Rezoned. I tilted my head. That's interesting, Gerald, because I never received any legal notice of rezoning. And as you should know, without proper documentation, you had no legal right to touch my property. Patricia's eyes darkened. We followed the law. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, holding up my phone, where I had already pulled up the official county zoning records. I scrolled through the document with practiced ease until I found what I was looking for. Then I turned the screen toward her. Her face drained of color. You didn't just overstep, Patricia. You committed felony destruction of private property. I lowered my voice to a deadly whisper. And you messed with the wrong person. She swallowed hard, but quickly recovered, rolling her eyes. Go ahead. Call the police. We have lawyers. HOA law is complicated, Judge. You're not the only one who knows how to use the system. I smiled. Oh, Patricia, you think you know the law? I took another step forward, looking her dead in the eye. I am the law. For the first time, she took a step back. I didn't need to argue with her. The battle was already won. The gas can, the lack of legal rezoning records, the video evidence from my security cameras, and the fact that I, of all people, knew exactly how to dismantle a case like this in a courtroom. They didn't stand a chance. As they turned to leave, Patricia threw one last glare over her shoulder. You won't win, she hissed. I watched her walk away, shaking my head. She had no idea just how wrong she was. I turned back to the ashes of my home, my heart still aching, but my mind already moving 10 steps ahead. I was going to take everything from them. They thought they had burned my farm to the ground, but all they had done was light a fire inside me. I didn't sleep that night, not because of grief, not because of the unbearable loss of everything I had built, but because my mind was already calculating, strategizing, plotting my revenge. And unlike Patricia Whitmore, I didn't operate on petty HOA rules. I worked within the full weight of the law, the same law that had put criminals behind bars, dismantled corruption, and ensured that no one, not even some power-hungry HOA president, could operate outside of justice. At sunrise, I was already on the phone with my attorney, Janet Foster, a bulldog of a woman who had been my closest legal confidant for years. They think they can bury you under paperwork and technicalities, she mused, flipping through the HOA's rezoning claims on her laptop. But they made a fatal mistake. What's that? I asked, pouring myself the strongest cup of coffee I could stomach. They thought you wouldn't fight back. I smiled. They were wrong. The first legal blow came swift and brutal. By noon, a court-ordered injunction was filed, barring the HOA from making any further changes to my property. That meant if they so much as moved a single rock, they'd be held in contempt. Then came the criminal charges. The gas cans I found in the ashes? The police took them for arson investigation. The security footage? It showed contractors trespassing onto my property without permission. And best of all, the official zoning records, the ones that Patricia claimed gave her the right to torch my land, they didn't exist. I drove to the county recorder's office myself, walked in, and asked to see the rezoning approval for Oak Ridge Estates. The clerk, a frazzled woman with reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, typed away on her computer. Strange, she muttered. It looks like there was a request to rezone that area, but it was never approved. I leaned forward. So, legally, my farm was never under HOA jurisdiction? She nodded. Correct. The application was rejected last month. I exhaled slowly, feeling that rush of victory settle in my chest. Patricia had lied, and she had burned down my farm based on a rezoning that never happened. That was criminal. That was malicious destruction of property. And that was her undoing. That evening, I arrived at the HOA meeting unannounced. The Oak Ridge Estates Community Center was filled with dozens of homeowners, most of whom had been persuaded by Patricia that my farm was a nuisance. I strode to the front of the room, my boots still dusted with the ashes of my farm, my eyes sharp, my jaw set. Patricia was in the middle of addressing the board, her voice thick with that same arrogance that had sealed her fate. "We must move forward as a community," she was saying, "and that means ensuring every homeowner adheres to the aesthetic values that make Oak Ridge Estates a premier living experience." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. The room fell silent. Patricia turned, her expression tightening when she saw me standing there. "Judge Crawford," she said, forcing a smile, "this is a private meeting." I stepped forward, dropping a thick folder of legal documents onto the table. "Not anymore." A murmur spread through the room. Some of the HOA board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others, like Gerald Carter, went pale. "I came here to give you all one chance to understand exactly what you've done," I said, my voice calm but dangerously firm. "Because by the time I'm done, every single one of you is going to wish you had never followed Patricia Whitmore into this mess." Patricia laughed, but there was an edge of nervousness in it. "Judge Crawford, you're overreacting." "Am I?" I interrupted, holding up a signed affidavit from the county recorder's office. "Because according to official zoning records, this farm you burned down, it was never rezoned into HOA control." The murmur in the room grew louder, rippling with unease. Gerald swore under his breath. Patricia's expression froze. I took a step forward. "That means everything you did, from the trespassing to the destruction to the fire, was illegal." I leaned in slightly, my voice dropping into that deadly calm tone I reserved for sentencing criminals in my courtroom. "And now you're all going to pay for it." Gasps echoed through the room. Someone in the back muttered, "Oh my God." Another homeowner, a woman with worried eyes, stood up. "Patricia, you told us the rezoning was already official." Patricia's face was ghost white. I was told." "You lied." I cut in. "And now you're going to be held responsible." I turned to the rest of the board members. "And let me make something very clear. I'm suing this HOA for every single penny of damages." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "And if you think I'm going to stop at a civil lawsuit, think again. The criminal charges are already in motion." Patricia staggered back, gripping the edge of the table. "You can't do this." I smiled. "Watch me." And then, the final nail in the coffin. The doors burst open. 2 police officers stepped inside. "Patricia Whitmore?" one of them said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. She froze. "You're under arrest for criminal trespassing, malicious destruction of property, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The room erupted into chaos. I didn't move. I just watched as the officers walked up to Patricia, her face contorted with horror, and snapped the handcuffs around her wrists. "You can't do this." I was protecting our community," she shrieked. The officers didn't respond. They just led her out of the room. As she passed me, I leaned in slightly, just enough for her to hear me. "Next time, Patricia, pick your battles more carefully." Her face twisted with hatred, but there was something else in her eyes now. Fear. Because she finally understood. She had messed with the wrong person. Aftermath and the farm's rebirth. The HOA collapsed within weeks. The lawsuit settled for over $500,000. Enough to rebuild my farm, expand it, and ensure it would never fall under HOA control again. Neighbors who had once looked away in silence now offered to help rebuild. And Patricia? Well, she spent 5 years behind bars, her perfect suburban life crumbling to dust. 1 year after the fire, I stood on my porch, watching the sunrise over my newly rebuilt land. The barn stood taller than before. The chickens clucked happily in their newly reinforced coop. And in the distance, the remains of Patricia's old house, sold off to pay legal fees. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp morning air fill my lungs. She thought she had burned me to the ground, but I was still standing, and my farm, stronger than ever.